Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Teacher's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Brian Costello, here to talk with some incredible educators and hear the stories that have made them who they are today.
Yep. Welcome back to the Teacher's Journey. I'm your host, Brian Costello, and I am very excited to be sharing the story of today's guest with you. Good friend of mine from another, former Toronto innovator from the Google Innovator Academy. So you're getting a theme here, like a wave of Toronto Google innovators, which is pretty great. Lucky for you guys. But I am absolutely thrilled and fortunate to have the amazing and incredible Kathrine Goyette joining me tonight. And she is an innovative learning consultant and out in Central Valley, California. Who knows, maybe going to be on the CVQ board soon. It looks pretty good for her. And a whole bunch of other awesome things. You'll be able to catch her at ISTE in a few weeks. You'll be able to probably catch her everywhere else on the planet. And not to mention the co-host of the CV Tech Talk Twitter chat and Facebook Live podcast. So thanks for joining me, Kat, and super excited to have you come and share your story with us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the intro. That was a pretty good intro there.
It's a mouthful. I almost ran out of breath. So as I was talking, more things were coming to mind. I'm like, Kat does this, Kat does that, Kat does this. And, all right, I got to make sure I mention all these awesome things. Not that we won't talk about many of them, in the next 4 hours while you tell us all the great things you do.
Well, this is a 4-hour podcast. I wasn't aware of that.
Wait, you weren't ready for the marathon? No.
I'm going to have to go get some something to eat or keep me going, but no, we're
just
good.
Have Adam bring a glass of wine and something to eat, and you'll be fine.
Perfect.
So yeah, Kat and I were fortunate enough to meet in Toronto at the Google Innovator Academy. I was then fortunate enough to come in and see Kat when she started the Tech Rodeo. Which is a really awesome conference. And if you happen to be anywhere near the Fresno, the Central Valley area in California, or you just want to visit a really amazing airport, I highly recommend heading out to Tech Rodeo, which is in January every year. So we'll get to that at some point. But so Kat, thanks for coming on. And I want to start with the beginning. So you've been in education for a while. I won't say how long unless you want me to. Tell us, how did you get into teaching, into education? Where did that start?
Sure. So my parents were both educators, and I love my parents, and they're amazing inspiration. They were an inspiration to me and still are. But as a young adult, I did not want to follow in my parents' footsteps because I didn't want to be my parents. I wanted to be me. So I was not wanting to go into education originally. I went to school I grew up in California, went to school in Eastern Washington, got a major in English because I love to write and I love literature, and wasn't really sure what I was going to do after that. Had some ideas, but didn't really know. So I came back to California and just kind of like needed a job, right? And needed to figure out what to do. So my former, I'm a trained musician, and my music teacher from when I started playing piano at age 4, and she said, hey, are you looking for a job? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, oh, why don't you come teach music for me? So I started way back then, right out of college, teaching piano classes for infants through adults. And what I discovered was it wasn't just the music that I loved, but I really got the bug for teaching. I loved to see students of all ages. I loved to see them achieve goals that they didn't think were possible. I loved to inspire them to try things that they weren't at first comfortable with. I love to see the light turn on when they finally understood something. And so I discovered kind of accidentally that I loved exactly what my parents did, which is education. So I was very fortunate. Actually, I did have a bit of a sidetrack away from education for a couple years. I owned an insurance agency. So, and what I found was, this was before I got my credential, and what I found was, for me, it just didn't feel it wasn't meeting my desire to truly connect and make a difference in I guess in young people's lives. And so while I loved the business building aspect and I loved speaking with people and making those connections that way, I felt like it was difficult for me to make a difference. So went back and got my credential, and my first job was teaching kindergarten and went on from there.
Teaching kindergarten. So you walked in, you're teaching kindergarten. The door closes, like the day begins, you just get started, and there's like, whatever, however many it is, probably 20 or so tiny little people.
Something, yeah.
4,000 of them. I don't know. If once you have more than 2, I think 5-year-olds, it qualifies as like a ton. So, what was that whole how did that whole first year go? What was it like? What was it like with how did it feel? Because like me, you didn't go to school to be a teacher. You kind of went back and got the credential, and you walk into a classroom and there's, a pile of kindergarten kids staring at you. Some of them probably crying because it's the first day of school.
Right.
What was the whole thing like? What was the first year like? And how did you manage it?
That's a good question. So I felt like I was super prepared before I walked in that first day. Like I really did. I had taught music for 8 years. I had had great master student teachers in the student teaching program who told me that one of my strengths was classroom management, right? But that was a different demographic than where I got my first job. And so there were different challenges. And it wasn't kindergarten where a lot of students with special needs aren't identified yet, things like that. So I walked in like, I think I got this, like, this is good. The only thing that I don't have in this community is I don't speak Spanish, and that'll be a little bit tricky because it's their first time coming to school. It was a lot more difficult than I ever anticipated. It was definitely my most challenging year of all of my educational career, which, and yet it was also where I learned, I probably learned the most there. And it was a great start because if I could have met those challenges and continued to want to teach the following year, then I'm good. So I walked into the class and I got my plans. I got everything laid out. I had these students came off the bus. Many of them, the first time they got off the bus, they had never heard English before. So I'm the first person that they're encountering that does not speak Spanish. And I don't know Spanish. So I'm using lots of motions, and I'm trying to I sit down and I motion like you should sit down too, and things like that. So it was, I kind of felt like I was thrown into the fire, but that was a good thing. And I learned a lot. I had some mentors I had a teacher right next door that had been teaching for a while who kind of, we'd have lunch together every day, and I would ask her questions and she'd help me out. And so that was very helpful. But yeah, I mean, that first year was certainly a challenge. We'll just say that.
And I mean, it's already a challenge in general. Just coming into a kindergarten class is really hard, especially if you haven't taught kindergarten before. So like my first year was also in kindergarten, and I never taught kindergarten before. My kids spoke English, and it was still really hard. Yeah. I mean, it just really was. It was incredibly difficult. So I can't imagine adding to the challenge of your kids don't really know how to communicate with you, because so much of kindergarten is about social interaction and communication and developing the ability to function in a group environment, which is just challenging when you can't communicate with other people. So, going on from there, obviously you didn't stay a kindergarten teacher forever, or for that matter, a super long time from what I understand. So, why the shift? What happened?
So I did want to try a different grade level. There was a grade level that opened up for second grade, and I wanted to see what it was like. I just wanted to kind of, my son was in second grade at the time. And so I thought, I think I got some good ideas that I learned from his teacher that I thought was pretty cool. I had student taught in second grade. So I moved to that grade level. It was a pretty good year. It went real well. Then I moved districts and got a job in first grade. And I loved, I feel like there's so much growth that you see in that grade level. So I had an amazing group of kids. It was awesome. Then I got the itch for wanting to make a greater impact. And I felt that I had some mentors and some administrators that had really supported me and as a teacher, and that helped me to impact my students. And I felt that was something that I wanted to do as well. So with that being in mind, I felt like I need experience teaching some older kids as well. So a sixth grade opening came up, and so I moved to sixth grade, and that was my favorite year in the classroom. Don't tell any of my K-1-2 students.
Sixth graders are fun. I have a lot of sixth graders now. They're an interesting group.
They're great.
In a great way, not in a bad way. I don't mean that in a bad way at all. They're interesting kids. In every possible way, they are very interesting, but they're still innocent enough and sweet enough that it's just fun. It's fun to talk to them and to hear them talk about things and go off on tangents and listen to them talk and share stories from their life. And so, they're fun.
They are. And it was an amazing experience. I had an awesome group of kids. I told them I will be at their high school graduation, which I will. And which is actually going to be next year, which is crazy. So, it was amazing. And after that, during that year, I went into a master's program to get my master's in educational leadership and administration. And the following year, I got a job as at another school site where I was kind of like a jack of all trades position. Where I was a coach for all content areas at the school site, which is a big job in and of itself. And then I did a lot of, I mentored some brand new teachers and intern teachers. I did a lot of administrative duties, discipline, kind of managing part-time employees, speaking with the community.
Right now on the video, you can't see her on the video, but she says discipline and her eyes kind of rolled up back into her head and she almost fell backwards, I think. I don't know.
Here's the thing.
Started listing that and all of a sudden I saw the reaction to her saying discipline. And I know that it's not an discipline thing, but I know that being an administrator and having to do discipline is not the most fun. So let's stop there for a second and talk about the
Yes. Please, because I weirdly, oddly enough, I miss that part of the job. I'm no longer at a single school site. I'm no longer in charge of discipline. And it was a tough road because systems needed to be put in place. And I did a lot of work in letting the kids know what the expectations were, but that was that was done in a caring environment, and that they could come to me, and that we had this relationship, and that there were expectations because I believed in them and all these things. And so there was a lot of grunt work, especially like that first year, that then made the second year's discipline job actually enjoyable for me. And the reason I say enjoyable is because when you leave the classroom, you often hear people say, "Oh, but you don't have the relationships with the kids." And for me, that wasn't the case, because that second year in that role, those kids that I saw a lot because they would clash with their teachers, their teachers needed support in, I even hate the word discipline, but that's what we use in the industry. I really was able to develop relationships with these kids, and I felt like that was so important because someone's got to reach them. Someone needs to know that someone some adult cares enough. So I remember one time I mean, I have lots of stories, but one of my favorite stories is we had fourth graders two fourth grade boys that didn't come to school. So we call a parent. Parent says, my son went to school. Well, your son's not at school. Well, my son's not at home either. So this parent was at work. So I got in my car and drove around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking about these kids. And we even called the police and they found them before I did. But when they came back to school and they had heard that I literally went out and drove around looking for them, knocking on doors, the looks on their faces was incredible. Like, wow, someone cares enough to want me at school. You know, it's not because I'm in trouble. It's because they actually want me at school. And I had that conversation when they came in. So that's the part that I loved about that role is doing the home visit, seeing what their backgrounds are, seeing where they come from, because it's those kids that are always in the principal's office that need a caring adult to show them that they are more than what they think.
That's really, really important. I think that's a part that's missed, I think, from that role. And I know that a lot of people do it well, but it's something that when you hear people talk about, especially like the assistant principal roles and things like that, which are often the discipline roles, you don't hear people talk about that enough. And I think it's an important piece that if you don't have that, you're not really getting the message across that it's not just about, all right, you broke the rules and here's the consequence. It's a learning piece for the kids, and they have to have trust in the person who's issuing the consequences. I mean, yeah, there's consequences, but there's also learning that has to go into it as well.
Yeah, we are in education after all.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you touched on something that I think is interesting because I noticed, I know as I've like learned from more people across the country, it seems like it's really common in a lot of places. You talk about doing home visits, and I just don't see anybody doing that in this part of the country. Like, it's just not a thing people do. You typically don't go to a student's home, not because you couldn't, but because it's just not the kind of thing people typically do. And so I'm curious about like what and like what did you think of? Was that something that you think was valuable? Did you ever feel like you were maybe not necessarily welcome, or that you were invading someone's privacy or anything like that? Because I think that's the common argument that I hear people give against things like home visits. So can you talk a little bit about like your experience with home visits and why you think they might be or not be important?
So with the home visits, I would say it wasn't something that was a common practice. It's something that I did extremely rarely as a teacher. I think I only did home visits like twice ever. And it was like to drop stuff off or to say, like when I taught sixth grade and there were some kids who did not fill out the permission slip for the field trip. And I wanted those kids there. And so I went to the homes and, let the parents know how important it was, et cetera, et cetera. But when I moved into a more administrative role, we had students who needed a lot of support as far as behavior, as far as wanting to come to school, not wanting to come to school. We had some interesting situations. I walked kids home when no one came to pick them up, those kinds of things. So it wasn't home visits that were like scheduled, and at least in my experience, I didn't do these home visits that were scheduled. It's not like the parents said, hey, come visit. I was going to the homes because I had either a concern about the child, I wanted to find out, to kind of get the parents on board, but even when it was just taking a kid home, walking them home, I learned a lot because I would see who's in their neighborhood, who's where are the parents? What are they going to talk to me? Are they going to engage in a conversation? How are they going to interact with their kids? Are there friends at the house? What are they doing? So it really just got me out into the community and helped me to have a better understanding of who those kids are and where they came from, so that I was better able to meet them where they're at. Like I'm this, they see me as this middle-class white girl from, another side of town. I didn't even live in the same city at the time, coming out, what do I know about their lives? And so actually going into that community, seeing where they live, talking to them, really helped me to understand and to relate to them. And I think it also showed them, parents included, that I cared enough that I wanted to be a part of the community. And so it made a really big difference. But like I said, it wasn't something where I was like invited, so to speak. But no one in that community, and it's different in different kinds of communities. In that community, education is highly valued. And so I was never unwelcome. And so it was always a positive experience. I don't know that is the same everywhere, but in our particular community that I was in, it was always looked upon very well by the parents.
That's interesting for sure. Because I know that I've talked to people, especially like in some people working in Texas and some places in the Southwest, and they said, yeah, we go visit every kid in the school, like their house, and they go like, hey, we're coming for a home visit. We're going to be there blank. Is this okay? And they just go. And I'm like, most people around here would be like, nope, don't come in. Like, no thanks, we don't want you here. Not that they don't value the teachers or the school or whatever. It's just that it just doesn't seem culturally appropriate in this area. And it's interesting to me whenever I learn about those differences. That's all for this part of the interview with Kat Goyette. Tune in next week or hit the subscribe button to get the notifications. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts to The Teacher's Journey. You can find out more about Kat's amazing journey and all the incredible things she's up to nowadays. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.